Hey, this is Pastor Mark. On today's episode of the Fultondale First Podcast, I talk with Larry Hyche. He's a great friend of mine, and he's also over men's discipleship for the State Board of Missions. So we'll talk about men's discipleship, but you'll also discover in our conversation how God has uniquely positioned us in history. Because of the generations that exist today, God has put us in a place of potential impact that we can't even imagine. So I'm excited about this conversation that you'll get to listen to and watch today.
Welcome to the Fultondale First Podcast. Our mission at Fultondale First is to love God, love people, and make disciples. And this podcast is aimed to help you join that mission. Thanks for joining us for this episode.
Welcome in to this episode of the Fultondale First Podcast. And today, I think you have a treat. You get to join me in a conversation with my good friend, Larry Hyche. And it's going to be, we're going to go in a couple different directions. And I think you're going to enjoy it and be encouraged by it. So welcome, Larry, to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Are you looking at that camera?
Should
I look at which?
You look at that one probably.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. But you can look at that one too. So that one and that will show you, that one and that will show me.
You're so fancy.
Well, I don't know about that.
I love it.
If it works, you know. It may sound like a tin can and we just, not even have video. That's, it may happen too. So, Larry, tell us a little about yourself and kind of what God has you doing and what God has used you in ministry to do before.
All right. It's great to be here. So I have, right now I'm currently serving with the State Board of Missions, Alabama Baptist State Board of Missions. So I'm one of your state missionaries and you're my boss, basically. So thank you for letting me have a job. So I work in the area of men's discipleship.
Okay.
And when they first approached me with that idea, it was, hey, do you want to do RAs in men's ministry? And I was like, no, I was on staff at a church doing discipleship after having been their student pastor. Discipleship is my heartbeat, and I know that's yours as well. Yeah. And so they said, no, we want to actually reach men and disciple men to make sure that they're healthy enough to disciple their children, their friends, their families. So that's what we get to do.
Yeah, that's a much better thing than RAs. I mentioned RAs to some people in our church last week, and they were like, "I've never heard of that." Mom.
What is that? Yeah.
Anyway,
well,
royal ambassadors.
It's a very different. We're in a different era.
Yes, we are.
So anyway, my background is in, like I said, student ministry and education discipleship ministry, and so that has been kind of the path that I've been on for years. We were just talking a few minutes ago about my first gig. I was the janitor at my little home church in Walker County, just north of here.
Those of you know Andy Frazier, Walker County.
Andy and I went to school together, although I was a good kid, so I didn't run in his circles.
Of course.
So I was a church janitor at age 15.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I've been serving Southern Baptist churches for, let's not talk about how many years that is.
For a few years.
A few. But yeah.
And so recently, and currently, in fact, you went back to school, really, to pursue a degree. So tell me a little bit about that degree.
All right. So I graduated from New Orleans Seminary 22 years ago with the master's and did all that. But I was praying about what should I do next to prepare for a different flavor of ministry. And so I've jumped into the education doctorate, and which is kind of funny because I've had people say, well, if it's only 7 hours less than a PhD, why don't you go for a PhD? I'm like, first of all, I don't need it. Okay. I just don't want it because that 7 hours, do you know what people do in that 7 hours? It's torture. So I'm not going there.
You're not volunteering for 7 hours of torture.
Exactly. And the EDD, it's very practical. It's taking the practical side of ministry, having a church staff background and where I'm at and doing a lot of practitioner type stuff. I need the practical side, but it also couples some of the study research based side, puts it together. So it's a very practical degree. So what I'm shooting for is looking at, all right, so I'm about to start the dissertation phase, and it's a mouthful of a title, but it basically deals with the effect of intergenerational relationships as far as the discipling relationship and how those relationships have an effect on the emotional and spiritual health of Gen Z. So we're talking about our youngest adults in the room right now. That would be about 18 to 28 years old. That's Gen Z. And they are known as the loneliest and the most anxious generation. If you look at those young adults who have relationships, who have like a intentional, regular time with other generations, that would be either millennials or our group, the Xers.
That's right.
Roll Tide. Or then you have the one above us, which would be the boomers.
Yeah.
Okay. If they have relationships that are spiritually based, that are kind of intentional in what they're doing, what does that do for their emotional state? What does that do for their spiritual state? And so, I mean, obviously, biblically, we know what should be the answer,
right? And
it should be that they're healthier.
That's right,
both spiritually and emotionally. So that's what we're digging into.
Should be happening. That's all. So I want to dive into that a little bit first. So because no matter where you are in life, no matter what God has called you to in your vocation, no matter what ministry you're involved in here at the church, I mean, this is huge, right? I mean, intergenerational relationship and impact on varying generations is huge. And so I think, from talking to you even, and from my own study, we're at a very unique opportunity. When I say we, I mean the church, not just Fultondale First Baptist. I mean the church, because of the generational change and shifting and different attitudes of the different generations. So I want you to, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about that unique opportunity that we as the church have because of the way the generations are stacked and the way their attitudes are different.
Yeah. All right. So if you go back to, I would say, the 1960s, 70s, when you had a lot of developmental psychologists that were getting to be mainstream, talking about, well, here's how children learn, here's how students learn, here's how young adults learn. You ended up with the church hearing that and responding to it by saying, oh, well, then we need to teach children this way and put them in their group. Yep. We have students who learn this way, so let's put them in this group. We have senior adults even that learn this way, put them in their group. And so you had silos.
That's right.
That emerged, and they have been put in concrete now in a lot of our churches and how we do. And this is our backgrounds, and we understand
this. And
this.
That's the way it's been in our church for so long.
Exactly. And we've grown up in that. I mean, I've grown up in that. And that's how I was trained in ministry, was in the siloed mentality. But over the years, if you'll look in your church, some of the healthiest people didn't just stay in their silos, but they were the ones who've heard from other voices of a different generation. And so, for instance, I would say in my last church, when I was at First Baptist Decatur, I had a bunch of students, a lot of teenagers, a lot of senior adults and middle-aged adults. I asked our students one time, all right, so who is your favorite Sunday school life group teacher? And we had all ages, okay? The favorite was 85-year-old Miss Betty Bird.
That is awesome.
And Miss Betty was one of those, she had no idea about their culture. She didn't give a rip about any kind of, oh, you've got to be careful what you say or anything like that. She was now she would have been at that time, this is about 10 years ago, she would have been the silent generation.
Right.
She wasn't silent. I'll tell you that right now.
But.
Yeah, exactly. And they loved her because she loved Jesus. She'd been through some crazy stuff in her life. She lost her husband to cancer. And so she talked about that. She talked about how the Lord helped her through all these different things. And she just loved those kids. And so she and her teaching buddy, they would have the kids over. They would go out to eat and spend time together. And so I would say that right now, one of the biggest opportunities that our churches have is not fall for the siloed mentality, but to have people speaking into the children's lives who are from our generation, who are from the grandparents' generation, making sure that we are basically cross-pollinating the generations. Because if you do keep them in their own little bubble, we see what's going to happen. I mean, you look at why Gen Z is so anxious and why they're so lonely. Think about this. All right, so they are the most connected group in human history.
Gen Z.
They have all types of social media. They have all the digital ways of being connected. If they wanted to have a camera on them 24/7, it could happen. Yet they're the most isolated. Why do you think that is? Well, it's because I would say social media is like salt water. If you are stranded in the ocean on a life raft and you are dying of thirst, what you going to do? You're eventually going to be tempted to drink the salt water. And to me, that's what is happening to our, not just our little kids, not just our teenagers, but now we're seeing it in the young adults.
Yeah.
Because what they're doing is they are so isolated, they are starving for authentic relationships, real connection, and they're turning to the easiest thing, which would be what's all around them.
It's right in front
And
of
that's
them.
the salt water of social media.
Wow.
And it's creating a thirst in them that they don't even know how to quench.
Mm.
But in the church, we do know that starts with an authentic relationship with Jesus.
That's right.
And with other people.
Mm.
And it better not just be those who are right there next to us, who are hurting just like us.
Right.
We need somebody who's a few steps ahead of us.
That's right.
Who's got a little more life experience, who can speak truth into our life. So I would say that the biggest opportunity right now the church has is tap into what I would call the sleeping giant of the boomers they take up a lot of pew space in a lot of our churches, right? Because that's where a lot of our churches are. We've got older folks in the church who have tons of life experience, spiritual wisdom. God, they've been walking with Jesus longer than anybody else in the church.
That's right.
Potentially, hopefully. And they should be the ones who we really tap into and rely on their wisdom and get them connected to our younger generations.
I think that's so vital, because I don't know how you feel, but I look back at my life and I feel like our generation missed that. Like, we didn't get that as much. I mean, obviously we did some, but I think in large swaths, that generation just looked at us and thought, they're messed up. I'm not dealing with them.
Well, sure, we were messed up. It was their fault.
That's right.
They're the ones who messed us up.
That's right. They're the ones that raised us, or our parents. So that's awesome. So, I think the tendency for a lot of us is to look at generation gaps, and the older we get, I think there's a temptation to look at younger generations and go, oh man, well, there's no hope there. I don't even know how to relate to them. And so we just don't even try. So I guess maybe what are some rays of hope, and what are some things that you have seen, not only in, your time as a student pastor, but even in your ministry with the state board? What are some things you've seen God doing in those younger generations that maybe we can join God in doing?
Yeah. One of the biggest and the first rays of hope during the research and all that stuff was a book by Tim Elmore called A New Kind of Diversity. They had Barna Research and other research organizations were digging into Gen Z to figure out what's making them work or not. And one of the research pieces found that the majority of Gen Z did not trust the government. It's like, oh, well, join the crowd. They didn't trust Hollywood, and they didn't trust the media.
Wow.
The group they trusted the most were the boomers.
Wow.
Okay, so you're telling me that they look to the older people in the room for wisdom, and they trust them the most. And to me, that kind of obliterates the lie that Satan uses, speaking and whispering to our boomers that, hey, you know how crazy those younger people are? That group you don't understand, they don't want anything to do with you.
Mm.
They hate you. They don't. That's a lie.
Mm.
Okay, you may not understand them,
Right.
but they actually want to hear from you. Because of the way they were raised, other demographic studies have shown Gen Z is actually closer in their behavior to boomers
Wow.
than any other generation. Because of the way they were raised, because of the atmosphere of the political climate, cultural climate, things that have happened in their lifetime set the stage for the boomers when they grew up too. So it's like our generation, they're not even looking at us.
Right.
They're smart to do so. Right? I mean,
Let's be honest.
We're a little sarcastic. I love telling people, look, if
jaded.
you want to understand us, let me just tell you, we'll make fun of you, and we don't care.
That's right.
And then when we hurt your feelings, we make fun of your hurt little feelings.
That's right.
If your hurt little feelings get together and make babies, we'll make fun of how ugly those babies are. Like, we just don't care. Okay. So they're looking at the boomers, and the boomers, if we could help the boomers in the room to not fall for the lie that they don't want anything to do with us, we would have like electricity going on. To me, it's revival. One of the other big rays of hope that I see with Gen Z, again, you go back to they're starving for connection. One of the other major studies with that group showed that they value connection and mentorship. Okay, now this is not a spiritual survey. This was just socially speaking.
Right.
That age group, they value mentorship so much that a third of them were already mentoring someone else.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, are you kidding me? All right, so millennials showed the same signs 10 years ago. I think it was Forbes and Entrepreneur. They did studies in the workforce looking at millennials, because at that time they were about to start taking over the workforce. And they showed that millennials felt they could stick around at a job more than 5 years if somebody would mentor them at that job. Okay, so millennials, it's basically what happens. You have millennials started this mindset because social media began to really become popular. The digital age became something during the millennials' lifetime. So what happened with the millennials has become just exponentially larger with Gen Z, because Gen Alpha right behind them, the studies are already showing Gen Alpha is worse than Gen Z as far as loneliness and isolation.
Wow.
So the millennials were already showing signs of, look, we need mentorship. We want to learn on the job training and these things. They also said, and I love this one about the millennials, they also said that if they didn't want to just make a paycheck, we want to make a difference. So they wanted to be a part of something that was making a difference, that was bigger than themselves. And that mentality is carrying over into Gen Z.
Even more so, I think.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Because if you look at what's happening on college campuses the last 3 years, impromptu baptisms of hundreds of college students, the Asbury revival, you've got a movement of the Holy Spirit on campuses that looks like something that happened back in the 70s or even with the Great Awakening. All right. So look at what happened just prior to the Jesus movement in the 1960s. All right. So I'm going to throw the word postmodernism. When it became mainstream in our culture in the 1960s, it was an echo to another time period over in Europe where people were beginning to say God is dead. All right. Matter of fact, Time magazine had a cover.
Famous.
Is God dead? And that was in the 1960s. And so you had the hippie movement. You had all these things going on where all of the biblical teaching that our nation, our Christian nation, had been raised on was now being questioned, just like it had just been questioned in Europe. Well, look what God did. When people were saying God is dead in our country, then comes the Jesus movement, the Jesus revolution, right?
That's right.
So think about what's happened in the last 15, 20 years in our country. You have this Marxism, which is wokeism, that celebrates any variation of truth, and it elevates any kind of emotion or feeling, and it says that there is no absolute truth.
That's right.
And so whatever you feel, that's what's true, which is another lie from Satan, of course. Right. But when you hear that there is no such thing as absolute truth, and that made a revival in the last few years, this generation is doing the exact same thing as the 70s. When we heard the hippies say God is dead, and God said, no, I'm still here. Watch this. Hold my Bible, watch this. That's right. And so here's what's happening now. Same thing.
Yeah.
It's a revival movement that is coming out of a response to culture saying, your religion, your God is just antiquated and dead. Oh, no, he's not.
That's right.
So now you have this generation that is experiencing revival, starving for connection and relationship. And they're looking to the boomers. Weren't the boomers the one that were a part of the Jesus revolution?
That's right. That's right.
I mean, it's just the Lord putting this whole thing together. So it's pretty exciting to see. And I would say that's probably one of the biggest things the church could do right now is to ignite the older generations to see. And there's a lot of stuff with the Gen Z that if you want to try to understand their culture, it's going to blow your brain. You don't have to understand everything about their culture, but just be aware and be empathetic.
Yeah.
Because we've all been teenagers at one time.
That's right.
And we all crazy and stupid at one
That's
time.
right.
Some of us may
Absolutely.
still be, but still.
Yeah. Sometimes we grow out of it. Sometimes we don't.
Sometimes. That's right.
I feel like it was just yesterday, but obviously it was a long time ago. Well, man, thank you for sharing that. And that is encouraging. I think that's a word we need to hear. And we can pray for those things as we activate some of our older generations in our churches. So that's encouraging. So let me shift gears as we close our time. And I want to ask you about the thing that you're responsible for at the State Board of Missions, and that's men's discipleship. We have, obviously, discipleship's big in our church. And we kind of recently kind of revived our men's ministry. And we've been doing the last year and a half, 2 years, some Bible studies, some events, trying to, gain some momentum and capture some of these men's hearts to even capture new men and then disciple them. So what are you seeing work? Because I want us to think about, big picture, not just, here, but what are you seeing work in terms of men's discipleship around our state and really just around the country? How's God moving in that?
Yeah. So in the last, I've been with the state board now 8 years. Mm-hmm. And I would say one of the two biggest shifts. One is the ages that men's ministry is now reaching. When I first started, at least for Alabama, I'm just going to go for Alabama because that's what I've heard the most from. Within our own state, I heard a lot of older people asking questions when I first got there. And it was a lot about brotherhood.
Yeah.
All right. You remember
Brotherhood breakfast?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. And dude, let me just tell you, I'm just going to confess this since we're so close to Walker County. So we're trying to change the culture of men's ministry from like just doing breakfast to being more discipleship, relationship, and all that healthier. Well, my dad is known in Walker County as the best gravy maker. I'm like, that's like
awesome.
If I worked for like, what were they called back in the Prohibition days? The revenuers. And if I was a revenuer, my dad is like the best moonshiner. It's like, come on, you're killing me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Anyway, so what I'm hearing is it's shifted from older leadership asking questions about brotherhood to now it's a lot of younger leaders, a lot of younger dads who are asking questions about how do we build a ministry that reaches younger men too? Mm-hmm. Because, and I've heard them say, some of them have said, what's going on with the old way that things were done for years, it's just not reaching us. And we don't have a lot. And the older guys have confirmed that. They've told me we're not reaching the younger men.
We've seen that here,
really
over the years, the shift.
Yeah.
What you're saying is exactly the shift that we saw we had to take.
Yep. And COVID did a lot for that. That affected a lot of ministries in different ways. I would say that with when in our state, Rick and Bubba, the more Rick and Bubba talked about Man Church, Shades Mountain in Birmingham had already started doing Man Church several years ago and saw a lot of success. Mm-hmm. All right. It's the same principle that Man in the Mirror, Patrick Morley, had been using for years. And that is host some kind of big event for your men about 4 times a year. In between those big events, you get them plugged into a small group Bible study. Basically, it was, Patrick Morley would say, it's like a conveyor belt. You're trying to build disciples and you got a process. You capture that momentum, you capitalize on it, and you keep it going throughout the year. As like when we were younger, you had Promise Keepers.
That's right.
All right. We saw how Promise Keepers was a good rally, but nothing in between.
Right.
So Man Church did the same thing as Man in the Mirror. And it is to capture that momentum. 4 times a year, you have some kind of big event. Get men plugged into small group Bible studies throughout the year. Okay. That's an effective strategy. It's a strategy. And that's what's missing in a lot of our churches. Yeah. So that's the second big thing that I've seen happen is that a lot of men's ministries fail to have any kind of plan, strategy, or idea. What's the purpose of your men's ministry? Yeah. All right. Once you have that biblically answered, go after it. Go hard after that.
That's right.
And if it looks like having 4 events throughout the year with Bible studies, that's great. Do that. But it's got to be something that is sustainable, that is creating healthy disciples who are able to make healthy disciples.
That's right.
And that's what I would say right now is at least that's sort of the conversation in the last 5 years.
Mm.
And that's what we get to do. We walk alongside churches just to show them, hey, here's some ideas. Here's some tools. I mean, every church is so different. I mean, there's no way. I was talking with a guy down in Bethlehem, Pine Barren. That's not like a metropolis. All right. So what I recommend to him, I am not going to recommend to you.
Right.
But it will have the same heartbeat, and that is the biblical mandate to make disciples.
That's right.
All right. Well, what's a disciple? You define that. You see what biblically a disciple is. And if that's your goal in making disciples in your men, out of your men in your church, then what's it going to take for your men? It could be that your ministry looks completely different than what happens at some other little church or
right.
major church or, Shades Mountain. They're a huge church. And so there's no way I'm going to say, hey, what they're doing,
right.
Mount Pisgah number 5, you do the same thing.
That's right. It's
Context,
going to look different. Yeah.
Context is key,
And I think that's true beyond men's ministry or women's ministry. Same concept. Obviously, it's a different way to do that because women connect easier than men do anyway. But I think that's every ministry. That it's got to be an element of that. Disciple making has to be the mandate.
Yeah.
In everything we do.
Absolutely. And let me tell you this. So in all this studies with the generation, I had to dig into some of the like male brain, female brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the coolest things I've learned. All right. So we've known for years that men and women think differently. You don't have to say anything because you'll get in trouble. I found that, all right, so men connect better shoulder to shoulder. Women connect better face to face.
That's right.
And part of that is because our brains are wired differently. The female brain fires left hemisphere, right hemisphere. They fire back and forth or side to side quicker, more efficiently than men. And so they're going from the nonverbal side to the verbal side, the creative side to the analytical side, like quickly and easily. For us, we tend to stick to one side of the brain and we fire front to back. Mm. And so that's why while they're talking and they want to be understood, we're sitting there trying to figure out how to fix it.
That's right.
We just want to fix it,
That's right. That's right.
So I would say for your ministry, do not do a men's ministry the way you're doing your ladies' ministry. It should look completely different.
That's right.
Like we're okay. We will connect better if we are standing over a barbecue pit, charring some kind of flesh.
That's
okay.
Right.
Like that's what we want to do.
Throw in a bean bag.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely. We're going to be,
because we're going to talk about stuff. We're going to do things. We're going to make certain noises and smells come out of our bodies. That's just not going to be appropriate for anyone else to be around.
That's right. That's good.
But that's how we bond.
That's how we connect. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing. And I also wanted Larry to be on because what he's doing, we're partnered with Larry, right? We're partnered with the State Board of Missions. So what he's doing, you're an extension of that just by your gifts. So in our church, every time you give $1, a part of that dollar goes to support exactly what Larry's doing and working with men and discipleship and even beyond that next gen and generational ministry. So
it's a good relationship.
It's an awesome relationship. I think
we
it's
appreciate
working
it
pretty good. So,
greatly.
But
hey, before you wrap it up, because I know you're about to wrap it up.
That's right.
Let me make this one last point about men's ministry.
Yes.
Relationship is critical for men's ministry. Just like it's through like the cooperative program, us partnering together, being on the same page. There was I'm going to give you this one little blog. It was through Men in the Mirror, and they made a blog post. Brett Clemmer made this great point about why do men's fraternities thrive, but men's ministries suffer?
Ooh, what a great question.
Now, besides beer, I think we know the answer. And it's the commitment level. It's high. We care about each other in the fraternity. There's a sense of real brotherhood. And there's time, there's commitment, there's a common goal going after those relationships and looking after each other. Now, if we could take that mentality and make sure that our men's ministries are more focused on relationship, biblically based relationship, they'll do well.
What a great question. What a great thought. Absolutely.
Sorry,
that's
I know
goal.
that completely wrecked. You were about to wrap it up, and I just threw that out.
That's good. That's awesome, man. I mean, that's what I want to end on.
Yeah.
Deep thoughts from Larry Hyche. I like it. Well, but seriously.
Deep thoughts. My deep thoughts are like RBF. It's resting Baptist face.
That's good. Yeah. I think we all have that at points. Well, thank you, Larry, for taking some time to sit down and talk and to share with me and our people what God's doing in your life and your ministry. And I know that it's been encouraging for our people. So thank you.
Anything we can do to help, man.
Well, for the rest of you, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Help us spread the word about the podcast by sharing on socials too. Thanks again, and we'll see you next episode.